Good evening. Tonight, I have 3 quiet stories for you. The first is about a woman who stopped at a motel on a road that seemed to have no end. The second is about a man who began receiving calls from his own phone number. And the final story is about a night guard who learned why the basement of an old library was never opened after midnight. Settle in, turn down the lights, and let the night become very still. Story 1, Room 14. By the time Clara saw the motel sign, she had been driving for almost 6 hours. Rain moved across the windshield in long silver threads. Beyond the headlights, the road was a narrow black strip through fields that had disappeared hours ago into mist. Her map app had lost its signal sometime after midnight. The radio had found nothing but static, and every mile marker had looked exactly like the one before it. Clara had planned to stay with her sister in Alderwick. It was supposed to be a simple weekend, a birthday dinner, a cheap bottle of wine, a chance to talk about things neither of them mentioned during hurried phone calls. Then a client meeting ran late, the motorway closed after an accident, and the detour sent her farther into the country than she had meant to go. At 1:43 in the morning, the pale blue motel sign appeared through the rain. One letter was missing. It read, "May not E.L." The building beneath it was low and long, with a reception office at one end and a row of doors facing the parking lot. Half the windows were dark. A single yellow lamp burned over the office entrance. Clara pulled in beside an old white van and sat with both hands on the steering wheel. She told herself she would sleep for a few hours, leave at dawn, and laugh about this when she reached Alderwick. The bell above the office door gave a tired little chime when she entered. Behind the counter sat a woman in a burgundy cardigan. She was perhaps 70, with silver hair gathered in a braid and a paperback novel open in front of her. The novel was face down, as though she had been waiting for Clara rather than reading. "Need a room?" the woman asked. Clara nodded. "Just until morning." "Of course." The woman took a brass key from a board on the wall. 14. The key had a plastic tag in the shape of a red apple. Room 14 was printed in fading black letters. Clara gave her name, paid in cash because the card terminal was apparently down, and asked if there was anywhere nearby to get coffee in the morning. "Drive east," the woman said. "You'll reach the town in 20 minutes, if the road is behaving." Clara smiled politely, assuming it was an old woman's joke. "And if it isn't?" The woman looked up from the register. "Then don't turn around." For a second, the only sound was rain ticking against the office window. Then the woman slid a folded paper across the counter. "There are a few rules for the room. Most guests find them sensible." Clara unfolded it outside beneath the yellow lamp. It was a short list. Keep the bathroom light on while you sleep. If anyone knocks after 2 a.m., do not answer the door. If you hear someone walking outside your window, remain still until the sound has passed. Do not look through the curtains before sunrise. If the telephone rings, let it ring exactly 3 times before you pick it up. Clara read the list twice, then laughed under her breath. She had seen this sort of thing online: themed motels, quirky owners, attempts to make a cheap room look memorable. She tucked the paper into her coat pocket, collected her overnight bag, and found room 14 near the far end of the row. The room was cleaner than she expected. A floral bedspread covered a double bed. There was a narrow bathroom, a little table with 2 chairs, a television bolted high on the wall, and thick green curtains over the window. The air smelled faintly of bleach and something older, like dust, inside a closed suitcase. Clara locked the door, checked it twice, and put her bag on the chair. The bathroom light was off. She remembered the first rule and turned it on, mostly because there was no reason not to. Warm light spilled across the tiles and into the room. Then she brushed her teeth, changed into a t-shirt, and lay down on top of the covers. The rain had softened. Somewhere across the parking lot, A pipe or gutter dripped at a steady pace. At 1:58, the television came on by itself. Clara sat up. The screen showed snow for a moment, then an old black and white film. A woman, in a long coat, walked down a street, while a man called after her. There was no sound. Clara found the remote on the bedside table, pressed the power button, and the screen went dark. She looked toward the curtains. Nothing moved there. At exactly 2 o'clock, someone knocked on the door. 3 soft knocks. Clara froze. Her first thought absurdly practical. Maybe the woman at reception had forgotten to give her a receipt. The second thought was of the folded rules paper in her coat pocket. Another 3 knocks came, a little farther apart. "Clara?" a voice said from outside. "It's your sister." Her body went cold before her mind had time to catch up. Her sister Helen was at home in Alderwick, and Helen's voice, when it came through a phone speaker, always had a bright edge to it, a quick warmth. This voice sounded flattened, as though it had been learned from an old recording. "Clara," it said again, "I know you're in there." She did not answer. The voice waited. Then it began to hum a tune their mother used to sing while washing dishes. A little melody Clara had not heard in years. She pressed both hands over her ears. The humming went on for perhaps a minute, perhaps 10. When it stopped, she heard footsteps cross the gravel outside. They moved slowly along the front of the room, then stopped at the window. The third rule: someone was walking outside your window. Remain still until the sound has passed. Clara lay perfectly quiet. The person outside did not walk on. Instead, there was a delicate scratching sound against the glass. It moved from left to right, then left again, as though a fingernail were searching for a seam in the curtain. Clara stared at the ceiling until her eyes watered. At last, the telephone rang. The old beige telephone on the table had not been there when she first entered. Or perhaps it had. Clara could not remember. It rang once, twice, 3 times. She got out of bed on unsteady legs and picked it up. For several seconds, there was only a soft hiss. Then the receptionist said, "You answered after 3 rings. Good. Do not speak. Listen carefully." Clara held her breath. "Whatever is outside has noticed you are awake. It will try to make you look through the curtains. It likes faces. Don't let it borrow yours." The line clicked dead. For a moment, Clara only stood there, the receiver pressed to her ear. Then the scratching began again, but this time it was accompanied by a voice. Not Helen's. Clara's own. "Please," it whispered from the other side of the curtain, "I'm locked out." She placed the receiver down without hanging it up. Her fingers shook badly enough that it took 2 attempts. The voice at the window began to cry. It was a perfect imitation of Clara crying. She heard her own sharp inhale, her own small broken catch of breath. It said her name once. Then it said, "I don't know how I got out here." Clara sat on the floor beside the bed and watched the strip of light beneath the door. At 2:17, a shadow crossed it. At 2:18, the bathroom light blinked. At 2:19, the doorknob moved. She had locked it. She knew she had. Still, the knob turned once, slowly, as if someone outside had all the time in the world. It turned back, then it turned again. The bathroom light blinked a second time. Clara remembered the first rule. Keep the bathroom light on while you sleep. She understood suddenly that she was not meant to sleep, not really. The rule was there to make sure the light stayed on, to make sure the room held a small piece of ordinary brightness while the thing outside waited for her to make one mistake. The crying stopped. Rain had stopped too. The silence beyond the walls became enormous. Then someone began walking outside the window. 1 step. Another. Gravel pressed beneath a careful shoe. The sound traveled from the far end of the window to the near end. It should have continued toward the door. Instead, it began again at the far end. 1 step. Another. Slow, patient footsteps, crossing the same short distance again and again. Clara did not move. She did not check her phone. She did not drink water. She watched the green curtains as though staring at them could make them stronger. At some point, exhaustion pulled at her. Her head tipped against the mattress. Her eyes closed for what might have been only a second. When she opened them, the bathroom light was off. Clara's throat tightened. She could see only the pale gray suggestion of dawn around the edges of the curtain. The room was quiet. She stood slowly. The switch was just inside the bathroom door. She crossed the room, keeping her eyes away from the window, and flicked it on. Nothing happened. Then, from the window, came one soft knock. Clara backed away. The sky beyond the curtains was becoming lighter, but she could not know whether sunrise had truly come. The rule said not to look before sunrise. The rain had hidden the moon, and her phone, when she finally dared to check it, had no signal and displayed 3:04. She waited. The minutes moved strangely. The clock on the wall said 3:04 for what felt like an hour. Then it jumped to 5:51, then 4:12. The room cooled. The television turned on again, silent, showing the same woman in the long coat, walking down the same black and white street. Clara sat in the bathroom doorway with the light behind her. She watched the numbers change without trusting them. Finally, a bird sang outside. It was a small, ordinary sound. Another answered it. The sky at the curtain edges brightened to a clear, thin blue. Clara waited another 10 minutes. Then she crossed the room and opened the curtains. The parking lot lay wet and empty, under a clean morning sky. Her car was where she had left it. The white van was gone. The motel office light was off. On the outside of the window, at the height of a person's face, were dozens of handprints. They were not smeared against the glass. They appeared to be beneath it, trapped inside the window, pale palms and long gray fingers, pressing outward from somewhere between the panes. Clara did not pack carefully. She shoved her clothes into her bag, left the key on the table, and ran to the car. The office door was unlocked when she passed. The receptionist stood behind the counter, exactly as she had during the night, except now she wore a coat and held a mug of tea. "You made it," she said. Clara wanted to ask 100 questions. Instead, she managed, "What was that?" The woman's expression softened. "Someone who stayed too long. In room 14? "No," the woman said. Outside it, Clara looked back across the wet lot. Room 14 stood at the far end, its green curtains open. Behind the window, the trapped handprints had vanished. "It follows the road," the woman continued. "It finds people who are tired enough to mistake an invitation for help. Every so often it finds this place first. Why didn't you tell me? Would you have believed me?" Clara thought of the rules in her pocket. She had laughed at them under the yellow lamp. The receptionist slid a new paper toward her. It was a road map, hand-drawn in blue ink. One route was circled. "Take this way east. Don't stop until you reach Alderwick. And if the road asks you to turn around, don't." Clara drove away without looking in the mirror. For 20 minutes, the road was ordinary. Fields appeared. Farmhouses appeared. Her phone found signal and flooded with missed notifications. Helen had sent 3 messages asking where she was. Then, at the side of the road, Clara saw a woman standing in the grass. She wore Clara's coat. Her hair was wet and dark around her face. One hand was raised in a small wave. Clara kept driving. The woman turned as the car passed. In the rearview mirror, Clara saw her mouth form 2 silent words. "Thank you." Clara did not turn around. Story 2. The calls at 3:17. When Daniel's phone rang at 3:17 in the morning, he answered because he believed it was his mother. She lived alone in a small flat on the other side of the city. She had recently fallen twice, once in the kitchen, and once while carrying laundry upstairs. Daniel had been telling her for months to use the emergency pendant around her neck, and she had been telling him for months that she was not old enough for one. So when the phone lit up on his bedside table and he saw his own number on the screen, he assumed she had accidentally used his old spare phone. "Mom," he said. There was a pause. Then Daniel heard himself breathing. Not the breath in his throat, another breath, tinny and delayed by a fraction of a second, coming through the speaker. "Hello?" he said. His own voice said hello back. The call ended. Daniel sat up in bed, staring at the phone. His wife, Lucy, slept beside him with one arm across the pillow. The room was dark, except for a thin stripe of streetlight under the curtain. He checked the call log. Incoming call, Daniel, duration 0008. He texted his mother, no reply. He called her. It rang until voicemail. For the next hour, he lay awake, telling himself there had to be an explanation, a spoofed number. A delayed voice loop, a pocket dial from his old phone, though he had sold it 2 years before. At 7, he called his mother again. She answered on the third ring, cheerful and annoyed to have been woken. "I'm fine," she said. "Why are you calling so early?" Daniel did not tell her. He made coffee, went to work, and spent the day feeling foolish whenever he remembered the call. The next night, at 3:17, the phone rang again. His own number. Daniel watched it ring until it stopped. At 3:18, a voicemail appeared. He listened to it in the bathroom with the door closed. For 28 seconds there was breathing. Then his own voice whispered, "Don't look at Lucy." Daniel stopped the message. His reflection in the bathroom mirror seemed too pale. Behind the closed door, the flat was silent. Lucy was asleep. Of course she was asleep. He did not look at her until morning. She was angry with him over breakfast. "You vanished into the bathroom in the middle of the night," she said. "Are you okay?" "I couldn't sleep. You looked at me like I was a stranger when you came back. I'm sorry." Lucy studied him, then touched his wrist. "Dan, is this about your mum?" He almost told her, but saying it aloud seemed like a way of giving it a shape. He said he was stressed at work. She accepted that because it was believable, and he hated himself for letting her. The calls continued. Every night, at 3:17, always from his own number. Sometimes he let them ring. Sometimes he answered. Sometimes there was only static. Other times there were messages, always in his own voice, always soft and hurried. "Don't use the lift tomorrow. Throw away the yellow envelope. When Lucy asks about the basement, say you don't know." Daniel obeyed the first 2 messages because it was easier to obey than to prove himself afraid. The next day, the lift in his office building stalled between floors for nearly an hour, with 3 people inside. The yellow envelope arrived in the post that evening. It contained a flyer for a new apartment development, nothing more. He threw it away without opening it. Then Lucy asked about the basement. They lived in a converted Victorian house, divided into 4 flats. Their flat occupied the ground floor, and the basement was used for storage. Daniel had been down there only twice, once when they moved in, and once when he tried to find the electrical meter. It was cramped, damp, and full of locked wooden cages belonging to other tenants. On a Sunday afternoon, Lucy found a key taped beneath the kitchen sink. "Did you know this was here?" she asked. Daniel looked at the small brass key in her palm. The call from the previous night flashed through his mind. "When Lucy asks about the basement, say you don't know." "No," he said. It was the first direct lie he had told her in years. Lucy shook the key once, listening to its tiny jingle. "It says B on it. Maybe it's the boiler room." "Probably an old one. Just leave it." She laughed. "You're strangely intense about that." That night, Daniel stayed awake before 3:17, sitting in the living room with every light on. He had placed his phone on the coffee table. Lucy had gone to bed early after an argument that had not quite become an argument. A tension stretched between them, tight and invisible. At 3:17, the phone rang. Daniel answered immediately. "Who are you?" he demanded. For a moment, there was only the familiar breath. Then his voice said, "You are." Daniel's mouth went dry. "That's not funny." "No," the voice said. "It isn't." The speaker crackled. Under the static, Daniel could hear another sound, a slow, hollow knocking. "Where are you?" he asked. "Downstairs." The call ended. Daniel stood in the living room for a long time. At last, he took the key from beneath the kitchen sink and went into the hall. The basement door was beside the front entrance. He had passed it every day for 3 years without noticing that it was painted a slightly different color than the rest of the hall. The key fit the lock on the first turn. Cold air came up from below. There was a bulb at the top of the stairs. Its light revealed wooden steps that descended into darkness. The smell was not merely damp. It was old earth, wet plaster, and the faint sourness of a room that had been sealed after something inside it died. Daniel took one step down. His phone rang. 3:18. He looked at the screen, his own number again. He answered. "Don't go down," said his voice. Daniel stopped. "You told me you were downstairs. I lied." "Why?" The voice hesitated. It sounded frightened now. "Because it learns by listening." From the darkness below came a second phone ring. Daniel backed up the stairs so quickly he struck his shoulder against the wall. The ringing continued from below, identical to the sound in his hand. He shut the basement door, locked it, and stood with his forehead against the wood. Behind him, Lucy said, "Dan?" He turned. She stood at the end of the hall in her dressing gown. Her face was sleepy, worried. "What are you doing?" Daniel almost told her everything. The calls, the voices, the warning. But before he could speak, his phone whispered from his hand. "Don't." He looked down. The call was still connected. Lucy had heard it too. Her expression changed. "Who was that?" "No one. It sounded like you. It was a prank." At 3 in the morning, the basement door knocked once from the other side. Lucy flinched. Daniel grabbed her hand and led her back into the flat. He locked the front door, though he knew that was meaningless. He sat with her until dawn, and told her only that someone had been harassing him. She did not believe the smallness of the explanation, but she did not press him. In the morning, he called their landlord. The landlord, a blunt man named Mr. Vale, listened to Daniel's questions without interruption. When Daniel mentioned the basement key, there was a silence at the other end. "You went down there?" Mr. Vale asked. "Just to the top of the stairs. The basement is not for tenants. There are storage units." "Not anymore." Daniel asked what that meant. Mr. Vale said he would come by that evening. At 5, Mr. Vale arrived with a canvas bag, a torch, and an expression that made Daniel feel as if he had been caught doing something much worse than entering a basement. Lucy insisted on staying in the flat while they spoke in the hall. "The building used to be a boarding house," Mr. Vale said. "Before I bought it. In the 90s, a man rented the ground floor rooms. He had a telephone repair business, kept old equipment down there. What happened? He disappeared. People disappear all the time." Mr. Vale's eyes moved to the basement door. His wife said he started getting calls at night, from his own number, said he became obsessed with the basement. One night, she woke up and he was gone. The next morning, the telephone in the hallway was ringing. It had been disconnected for 12 years. Daniel felt the blood leave his face. Did they find him? No. Mr. Vale opened the canvas bag. Inside was a black rotary telephone, its cord neatly coiled. This was found in the basement after the police were done. The phone looked older than Daniel expected. Its surface was scratched. A small label beneath the dial had been written in blue ink. 0317 Toin. Why bring that here? Daniel asked. Because if it has started calling you, it means the line is open again. What line? Mr. Vale looked almost embarrassed to say it. The one beneath the building. He explained that the street had once run alongside a telephone exchange. During the war, cables were laid through the ground and later abandoned. In the 70s, a maintenance worker found an old service tunnel below the building. It was bricked over after a collapse, but according to the old tenants, the lines never stopped carrying something. People hear voices, Mr. Vale said, voices of relatives, voices of themselves. It does not matter what the voice says. It wants you to answer. Then it wants you to go lower. Daniel thought of the message that had told him to go downstairs. Then the one that had warned him away. There are two voices. Mr. Vale nodded slowly. There are always two. That evening, the landlord changed the basement lock and took the key. Daniel felt briefly ridiculous for being relieved. He and Lucy ordered takeaway, watched a film, and tried to behave like people who had not spent the day discussing supernatural telephone lines. At 3:17, Daniel's phone did not ring. At 3:18, Lucy's did. Her own number glowed on the screen. She looked at Daniel. He looked at her. Neither of them moved. The phone rang until it stopped. Then a voicemail notification appeared. Lucy began to cry before she even listened to it. Daniel took the phone from her, but she shook her head and pressed play herself. Her voice came through the speaker. Daniel is lying to you. The message ended. For the next week, the calls came to both of them. They tried new numbers. They turned their phones off. They slept at a hotel. Nothing mattered. At 3:17, one phone or the other would ring. Some messages were uselessly cryptic. Others described things that happened the next day. Once, Daniel's voice warned Lucy not to take the bus. She ignored it, and a driver had a seizure at a traffic light. No one was hurt, but the bus struck a parked car. The warnings made them listen. That was how it kept them close. Then, one night, Daniel received a message that did not sound like him. It sounded older, thinner, like a recording played too many times. There is a way to close the line, it said. Bring the telephone down. Leave it where the ringing began. Daniel showed Lucy. She stared at the message for a long time. Mr. Vale has the phone, she said. I know. And the key. I know. They went to Mr. Vale's house the next morning. He was not there. His neighbor said he had left 2 days earlier to visit his brother in Wales. Daniel called him repeatedly. No answer. At dusk, Lucy found the landlord's canvas bag behind the bins outside the building. The rotary phone was inside. Its cord was no longer coiled. It trailed down the path, under the basement door, through the crack at the bottom. Daniel wanted to leave. He wanted to call the police, though he could imagine no version of this story that would not sound insane. But Lucy was looking at the cord as if it were a hand reaching for them. We have to finish it, she said. The basement door was unlocked. Below the stairs, the darkness was thicker than it should have been. Daniel held the torch. Lucy carried the phone. They descended together, step by step, until they reached the basement floor. The storage cages had gone. In their place was a long corridor with exposed brick walls. It was not possible. The basement beneath their building was too small for a corridor. The cable ran down the center of it like a black root. At the far end was a doorway filled with pale light. As they walked, telephones began to ring behind the walls. Not one phone. Hundreds. Some rang sharply. Some buzzed. Some made the old mechanical trill of rotary instruments. Between them, Daniel heard voices speaking through walls. A mother calling a child. A man whispering an apology. Someone laughing softly. Then Daniel heard his own name. Daniel. His mother's voice came from somewhere to the left. Daniel, please. He almost answered. Lucy gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. At the end of the corridor, the room beyond the doorway was round and low-ceilinged. Thick cables disappeared into every wall. In the center stood an old switchboard, its panels covered with cracked plugs and tiny brass labels. A single empty socket waited at its front. The phone cord fitted. Lucy stepped forward. Daniel's own voice came from every wall at once. "Don't plug it in." The frightened version spoke through the phone in Lucy's hands. "Plug it in." Daniel realized that the two voices were not separate. They were a loop. One called him down, the other tried to stop him. Both kept him listening. Both kept him close to the line. "Lucy," he said, "wait." But the room was ringing now. The sound swallowed his words. Lucy moved as though sleepwalking. She lifted the plug. Daniel reached for her. The moment his fingers touched her wrist, every ringing phone stopped. The silence that followed was worse. In it, a new voice spoke from behind the switchboard. "Thank you," it said. It was Daniel's voice, but it was not coming from a speaker. Something shifted in the darkness behind the panels. A shape unfolded slowly, too tall for the room, made of cable and pale skin, and the suggestion of a face. Its mouth opened. Daniel saw, in the wet black hollow of it, the tiny glow of a phone screen. His own number. Lucy screamed. Daniel grabbed the phone from her hand and shoved the plug into the socket. For a second, nothing happened. Then the switchboard lit up. Every lamp flashed white. The cables convulsed. The shape behind the panels pulled backward as if dragged by a current. The room filled with the sound of thousands of unanswered calls ending at once. Daniel threw himself over Lucy. The lights went out. When he opened his eyes, they were lying on the basement floor beside the stairs. The corridor was gone. The storage cages were back. The rotary telephone sat between them, silent, its cord cut cleanly in half. They moved out 2 weeks later. They did not tell anyone why. Mr. Vale never returned. The police said there was no record of him owning the building. A different company handled the sale, and the man Daniel had known as Mr. Vale seemed to have existed only in rent receipts and old voicemail messages. For months, Daniel slept badly. He kept his phone in another room. He changed his number again. Slowly, life became normal enough to bear. Then, on the first anniversary of the night in the basement, his phone rang at 3:17. Daniel stared at the screen. It was not his own number. It was Lucy's. She was asleep beside him, her phone charging on the dresser across the room. He did not answer. At 3:18, the call stopped. At 3:19, a voicemail appeared on Lucy's phone. Daniel watched the notification glow softly in the dark until morning. He never listened to it. Story 3. The Basement Catalog. On the first night Elias worked at the Renford Library, the head librarian told him not to go into the basement after midnight. She said it while handing him a ring of keys and a thermos of tea. "The public leaves at 6, Mrs. Arkwright explained. "The cleaners arrive at 7. After that, you lock the East Reading Room, check the galleries, and sit at the front desk until morning. It is mostly quiet." "Mostly?" Elias asked. Mrs. Arkwright looked toward the long corridor behind her. The library had been built in 1889, a gray stone building with arched windows, and a clock tower that had not kept correct time in decades. Even in daylight, its halls carried the muffled hush of a place where thousands of people had spent years trying not to be heard. "The building settles," she said. Elias nodded. He had worked night shifts before, a petrol station, a hotel, a warehouse. He knew old buildings made sounds. Pipes clicked, wood shrank, air moved where it should not. He had taken the library job because it seemed easy, and because the pay was better than his last job at the warehouse. Mrs. Arkwright pointed to the key ring. "That black key opens the staff door. Brass key, the archive room. Small silver one, The emergency cabinet. Do not use the red key. Elias found it near the center of the ring. It was old, painted dull red, with no label. What does it open? The basement catalog. What's in there? Mrs. Arkwright gave him a look that was not quite stern and not quite afraid. Old records. Things that have not been borrowed in a very long time. Why can't I go in after midnight? Because the catalog is being updated then. Elias waited for the joke. None came. Mrs. Arkwright checked the clock in the hall. It said 4 minutes past 5, though Elias's phone said 5:22. If you hear typing below you, she added, do not answer it. If you hear your name, continue with your rounds, and if someone asks you to help them find a book, tell them the library is closed. She collected her coat and left before he could ask another question. For the first few hours, the job was exactly as simple as promised. Elias watched the last visitors leave, helped an elderly man find the exit, and waited while the cleaners pushed their carts through the entrance hall. By 8, the library was empty. Outside, rain began. The reading rooms looked different at night. Lamps threw small circles of amber over the tables. Endless shelves became dark corridors. The portraits of former benefactors seemed to watch him from the walls, their eyes caught in varnished shadow. Elias made his rounds at 9, 10, and 11. On the third round, he noticed a book lying open on a desk in the history room. It had not been there before. The book was a large volume of local records, bound in faded green cloth. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. Elias looked for a name or a barcode, but the inside cover held no library stamp. It was open to a page titled Renford, Missing Persons, 1901 to 1907. Beneath the heading was a list of names. Elias had just begun to read when the grandfather clock in the hall struck 12. It gave 13 slow chimes. The lights flickered. From somewhere beneath the floor came the faint clatter of typewriter keys. Elias stood very still. Mrs. Arkwright's instructions returned to him. If you hear typing below you, do not answer it. He closed the book and left it on the desk. He told himself there was probably an automatic display in the basement, some old machine in the archives. He walked back to the front desk, made tea, and opened a crossword on his phone. The typing continued. It was not constant. There would be a burst of keys, quick and confident, then a pause, then the carriage return bell, a cheerful little ding in the darkness below. At 12:18, a voice called his name. Elias. It came from the staircase leading to the basement. Elias did not answer. Elias, could you help me find a book? The voice belonged to a young woman. It was polite, a little embarrassed, exactly the voice of someone trying not to disturb a librarian. Elias remembered the final instruction. The library is closed, he said, trying to sound bored rather than afraid. The typing stopped. After a moment, the woman said, I know. Elias looked down at the desk. Then you'll have to come back tomorrow. There was a long silence. Then the voice said, very softly, I did. Every tomorrow. The lights above the front desk went out. Elias sat in darkness with his hand clenched around the torch. He did not turn it on. He did not move. The rain pressed against the high windows. Somewhere in the library, a book fell from a shelf. At 12:42, the lights came back. The staircase door to the basement was closed. At 6 in the morning, the cleaners returned. Daylight thinned the fear into something he could almost laugh at. Mrs. Arkwright arrived at 7 carrying a paper bag of pastries. She listened as Elias described the typing, the voice, and the lights. You did well, she said. What was it? Something looking for a reader. That is not an answer. It is the closest one I have. She set a pastry on the desk, then took the red key from his ring. Do not use this tonight. I wasn't planning to. Good. For 3 nights, nothing happened. Elias settled into the rhythm of the work. He listened to audiobooks during his rounds and learned which floorboards complained beneath his feet. He began to recognize the building's harmless noises. The pipes in the west wall knocked twice at 1:10. The elevator cables groaned when the rain was heavy. The old clock ran 8 minutes slow until midnight, and then it became unpredictable. On the fourth night, he found a note on the front desk. It had been typed on yellowing paper. Please return the following item to the basement catalog. The Life of Elias Ward. Elias read it 3 times. He was 41. He had never written a book. He did not know anyone who would make that particular joke. He searched the shelves anyway. He told himself it was because he wanted to find the prank before it got worse. The library's public catalog showed no title matching his name, but in the basement stairwell, tucked between the rail and the wall, he found a card catalog drawer standing open. He had never noticed it before. Inside were hundreds of index cards, each with a name written in black ink. The first card he touched read, M.R.S. Lila Barrett. Beneath the name were dates, 1932 to 1957. On the reverse was a neat line of text, returned incomplete. The next card read, T.B. Hollis, 1888 to 1911. Overdue. The third card read, Elias Ward, 1985. His fingers went numb. On the reverse, in fresh ink, were the words, due, 12 a.m. He put the card back. He closed the drawer, and then he heard the typewriter beneath him start again. Elias went upstairs and called Mrs. Arkwright. She answered after several rings, sounding as though she had been awake and waiting. You found a card, didn't you? What is this place? A library, she said. No. For a few seconds, he heard only the soft crackle of the connection. Before it was a library, she said at last. The building was a private collection. Renford's founder, Samuel Wren, believed every life could be recorded, not remembered, recorded. He gathered diaries, letters, baby teeth, lockets, legal papers, anything that seemed to prove a person had existed. That sounds like a museum. He called it a catalog. Elias looked down the hallway. The shelves seemed to stretch farther in the dim light. What happened to him? He disappeared in the basement in 1907, and now it types people's names? It updates the records. That doesn't mean anything. Mrs. Arkwright sighed. The library learned to preserve what Wren collected, but it does not understand preservation the way we do. It thinks a life is safer on paper than out in the world. It asks people for their stories. If they answer, it begins a book. Elias thought of the woman's voice asking for help finding a book. What happens if it finishes? The person becomes part of the collection. Meaning they are gone. But the book remains. Elias laughed once, without humor. You hired me and didn't think this was worth mentioning? I hired you because the library needs a night guard, and because, until now, it has not asked for you. Why me? It asks for people who have lost something. It finds an empty space and offers to fill it. Elias did not reply. His younger brother, Jonah, had vanished 20 years earlier. He had been 10. Elias had been 19. Jonah left the house one afternoon to buy sweets and never came back. There had been searches, posters, police interviews, and the slow, cruel fading of everyone's certainty. Elias had never spoken about it at work. He rarely spoke about it at all. Mrs. Arkwright's voice softened. It may offer you a book about him. Elias looked at the black staircase door. If it does, she said, do not read it. The call ended. At 11:58 that night, Elias was standing at the front desk with his coat on. He had decided he would quit. He would leave the keys on the counter and walk out before midnight. The job was not worth it. No job was worth it. Then the lights in the entrance hall dimmed, and a book slid from the return slot onto the desk. It was small, leather-bound, and marked with no title. On the cover, pressed in faded gold, was a single name, Jonah Ward. Elias could not breathe. He did not touch it. He stood staring at it, his whole body pulled toward the book and away from it at the same time. At midnight, the typewriter began. Below the desk, a mechanism clicked. The return slot opened again. A narrow strip of paper emerged, inch by inch. Elias Ward. Requested item available in basement catalog. The red key was in his pocket. He did not remember taking it from Mrs. Arkwright's office. Perhaps he had slipped it into his pocket days before. Perhaps it had always been there. Elias picked up Jonah's book. It was cold. The basement door opened by itself. The stairs beyond were lit by a row of yellow bulbs. At the bottom, the typing waited. Elias knew every warning. Do not answer. Do not read. Do not use the red key. But 20 years of not knowing is a kind of hunger, and hunger makes rules sound very far away. He went down. The basement was larger than any basement had a right to be. It extended beneath the library in avenues of shelves, each rising into darkness. Books crowded every surface. Some were thick and new. Some were small as prayer books. Some appeared to be bound in cloth, leather, bark, or something he did not want to identify. Tiny lamps glowed at the ends of aisles. Between them, card catalogs stood like rows of sleeping cabinets. The typewriter sat on a desk in the center of the room. No one was seated before it. Yet the keys moved. Click, click, click. Elias approached slowly. A sheet of paper fed through the roller. His name appeared, one letter at a time. Elias Ward enters the catalog. At 12:03 a.m., he stepped back. At the far end of the room, a child began to sing. It was a song Jonah used to sing while drawing at the kitchen table. Only a few nonsense notes, rising and falling. Elias had not thought about it in years, but he knew it instantly. Jonah, he said. The typewriter stopped. He had answered. The lamps along the shelves brightened. At the end of an aisle stood a boy in a red raincoat. His back was turned. He was about 10 years old. Elias took one step toward him. Jonah? The boy turned. His face was not Jonah's face. It was a smooth white page, blank, except for a small line of print where his mouth should have been. I have been waiting for you. Elias ran. He did not know where he was running. Aisles folded around him. Shelves rose on both sides, their books whispering as he passed. Some covers opened and shut like mouths. Others carried names he recognized from missing person posters, news reports, gravestones. He saw his mother's name on one spine and stopped so suddenly he nearly fell. The book read, Margaret Ward, A Life of Waiting. He reached toward it. Don't, said a voice behind him. Elias turned. Mrs. Arkwright stood at the end of the aisle, holding a lantern. She wore her wool coat over a nightdress, as though she had hurried from bed. You came, Elias said. Of course I came. How did you know? It called me too. The shelves creaked. Somewhere nearby, paper tore with a sound like distant thunder. Mrs. Arkwright took his arm. We need to leave before it gives you an ending. It has Jonah. It has a record of Jonah. What's the difference? She looked at him with grief, so open that he understood, suddenly, that she had lost someone too. Everything, she said. They began to move through the aisles. Mrs. Arkwright led him not toward the stairs, but toward a narrow passage behind a shelf. The basement changed around them, responding to their movement. Lamps went out one by one. The typewriter started again. Fast now, frantic. Why are you still here? Elias asked. Because I was a reader once. What? My daughter disappeared here in 1974. I came looking for her. The library offered me a book. I read it. Elias heard the pain beneath her calm voice. What happened? I saw every moment of her life that I remembered. And then I saw moments I had never known. It made me believe she was still inside the pages. I spent years coming back, reading, adding to the collection without realizing it. Every memory I gave it became a paragraph. Every question became another chapter. How did you stop? I did not completely. They reached a locked iron door. Mrs. Arkwright held out her hand. The red key. Elias gave it to her. She unlocked the door. Beyond was a small stone room with a single shelf. On it sat a book bound in black cloth. The title was embossed in gold. The Renford Catalogue. This is the original, she said. The first record. If we destroy it, the library may release everyone. May, or it may simply lose the shape it has learned to wear. And what happens to us? I don't know. Elias stared at the book. It looked harmless. That was the worst thing about it. A small object on a shelf, waiting to be opened. Behind them, the pale-faced boy spoke in Jonah's voice. Elias. Elias closed his eyes. Don't listen, Mrs. Arkwright whispered. I'm scared, the voice said. I've been here for so long. The words were exactly what Jonah might have said. They carried the old fear Elias had imagined for 20 years. The fear of a child who had waited for someone to find him. Elias's hand moved toward the book. Mrs. Arkwright caught his wrist. It wants your grief, she said. That is how it writes. The room shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. On the shelf beside the catalogue, a second book appeared. The Life of Elias Ward. It was open. On the page, lines of ink were writing themselves. He raised the red key. Elias Ward opened the book. He looked down despite himself. The page described the basement in perfect detail. It described the lantern in Mrs. Arkwright's hand, the dust in the air, the weight of the key against his palm. Then he saw a paragraph lower on the page. At 12:19 a.m., Elias understood that he could not save Jonah, but he could join him. Elias tore the page out. The basement screamed. It was not a human sound. It was the shriek of 1,000 pages pulled from their bindings, the groan of shelves falling through floors, the howl of wind trapped in a chimney. The black book on the shelf opened by itself. Its pages turned so quickly, they became a gray blur. Mrs. Arkwright seized the catalogue. Run, she said. They ran through the iron door as the shelves collapsed behind them. Books spilled into the aisles, opening in the air, their loose pages flying around Elias like white birds. Names rose from the paper in whispers. He heard Jonah's voice one final time, no longer coming from the child shape, no longer afraid. Go home, it said. Elias and Mrs. Arkwright found the staircase, where no staircase had been moments before. They climbed. The basement door slammed behind them, just as the grandfather clock struck 1. The library above was dark and ordinary. The rain had stopped. Mrs. Arkwright leaned against the wall, holding the original catalogue against her chest. The black cover had cracked. Thin smoke curled from between its pages. What do we do with it? Elias asked. She looked toward the fireplace in the staff room. At dawn, they burned the book. It did not burn easily. The first match went out. The second guttered blue. On the third attempt, flame took the corner of the cover and traveled across it in a slow, bright line. The pages did not blacken. They lifted one by one, glowing from within, and dissolved into pale ash before they reached the grate. As the final page vanished, the library's clock began to tick correctly. Elias resigned that morning. Mrs. Arkwright did too. The city council closed the library for renovations. Officially, there had been water damage in the basement. Contractors removed shelves, repaired pipes, and sealed a section of stonework that led nowhere on the plans. For a while, Elias slept better. He visited his mother more often. He spoke Jonah's name aloud. which he had avoided for years. He tried to accept that not knowing was painful, but that pain was not the same thing as an answer. Then, 6 months later, a padded envelope arrived at his flat. There was no return address. Inside was a small book bound in red cloth. On the cover, in faded gold letters, was the title, Jonah Ward, The Years After. Elias stood in the kitchen for a long time holding it. He did not open it. He took the book to the river and placed it in a public bin beneath a broken street lamp. Then he walked away without looking back. The next morning, it was on his bookshelf. He threw it away again. It returned. He burned it in the fireplace. The ash cooled, and the red cover appeared beneath it. At last, Elias placed the book in a locked drawer at the back of his wardrobe. He never opened it. But sometimes, when the house is quiet and the clocks are close to midnight, he hears the soft turning of pages from inside the drawer. And once every year, on the night Jonah disappeared, he hears a child's voice from behind the locked wood. Not asking for help, just reading. Those were tonight's 3 stories. The motel room that should never be answered, the phone call from a number you already own, and the library catalog that keeps every life it can record. If you enjoyed these quiet horrors, you can subscribe for more stories to keep you company through the night. Sleep well, and if you hear a knock after midnight, perhaps wait until morning.